Alice is the second daughter to Edward and Elizabeth Chandler. She was born in the year 1780. She met Finian when she was 16 and he was 32. After they married, she inherited his surname, von Taylor. They were deeply in love, but Finian wasn't always kind and loving. Alice often painted as a way to escape his outbursts. In 1798 they had a son. They named him Bartholomew. In 1799 they had another son named Godfrey. Then in 1801 they had their final child, Cain. Together they were the Von Taylors. Through the years Finian became more abusive. Alice was often the victim to it. But as the boys aged they had also become victims to it. Finian did not hold back against his sons. He showed them no affection and had zero tolerance for misbehavior. Godfrey often hid in his room to avoid his father. Finian was easily provoked by Cain, who was a little younger. Because of this, Cain would pick fights with his brother to feel better. Alice was their only moral compass. Unlike Alice, they had an escape. The boys liked to explore whenever their father was angry. They always argued and broke into fights. The boys enjoyed their freedom and would stay out late. One night, Cain and Bartholomew got into an argument. Godfrey started to drown. Bartholomew and Cain were too busy to notice their brother in danger. When they finally did, it was too late. Godfrey von Taylor passed away in 1810 at just 9 years old. Cain felt bad for being so mean to his brother. He blamed himself for his death. After Godfrey's death, the boys were no longer allowed out. Alice often went into Godfrey's room. Part of her expected him to be there. Finian started to drink a lot more. He would take his anger out on Alice and the boys. He blamed them for Godfrey's death. One night he couldn't control himself. He had strangled her until she fell lifeless to the floor. When he realized what he had done, it was too late. Unfortunately, Alice passed away in 1810. She was 30. The boys mourned her while Finian stayed home. Cain blamed his father for his mother's death and became a very angry person. He got into many fights as a release. That didn't change as the years passed. He was still upset about the death of his brother and mother. He despised his brother for moving on and hated his father for never talking about it. Meanwhile, Bartholomew found love. Her name was Jane Silversweater, and she was stunning. Bartholomew was completely in love with her. He asked her to marry him, and she said yes. He moved her in and introduced her to the family. During that time, Finian had caught a deadly illness. Most of his time was spent ill in his room. However, Jane seemed very fond of Cain, and he was fond of her. They started an affair behind Bartholomew's back. It didn't take long before Bartholomew grew suspicious. When he confronted Jane, she confessed the truth. He was really upset by this. But despite his emotions, he forgave her. He was more upset with Cain. As much as he told him off, Cain didn't care. Bartholomew grew frustrated and hit him, but Cain's temper was worse than his. Jane was shocked to see what Cain had done and gave him a piece of her mind. Still, she was head over heels for him. She later told Bartholomew that Cain was who she truly loved and ended their engagement. Around the same time, Finian had passed away. Bartholomew started drinking as Jane's love for his brother grew. They were happy and he hated it. The worst part for him was Cain didn't love her the way he did. Still, they were expected to marry soon. Bartholomew knew he couldn't be his brother, so he came up with another way to get rid of him. He had Cain's favorite meal prepared with a secret ingredient. Cain sat down and ate as he normally would. He enjoyed it, but it made him a little nauseous. He went to bed that night with an upset stomach. Later, Cain woke up with a terrible feeling. The pain was so unbearable that it killed him. Jane didn't realize that he was gone until the next morning. Cain had passed away at 16 years old in 1817. Jane was absolutely devastated. Bartholomew was there for her and their love resurfaced. He soon proposed to her again, and she said yes. They moved into a new estate where they were married. Jane discovered she was pregnant very early in their marriage. When she broke the news to Bartholomew, he seemed excited. But Jane knew that baby was Cains and was afraid to tell that to Bartholomew, so she kept that to herself. Bartholomew Vaughan Taylor was born in 1798. He is the first son to Alice and Finian Vaughan Taylor. In 1816, he was engaged to a woman named Jane. He was completely in love. But when he introduced her to his family, she became fond of his younger brother Cain. Jane eventually ended things with Bartholomew to be with him instead. Bartholomew hated his brother for taking her from him. They fought a lot. He started drinking to cope, but nothing helped. Bartholomew was so envious that he poisoned Cain to get her back. As horrible as it was, he got what he wanted in the end. He married Jane in 1817. Shortly after they were married, Jane discovered she was pregnant. Bartholomew was happy to hear it. However, Jane was aware that the real father of her child was his dead brother. As months went by, Jane decided to keep the truth to herself. There wasn't a day that she didn't miss what she could have had with Cain. She was grateful to carry a piece of him. Bartholomew didn't even have the slightest idea that the baby wasn't his. In 1817, Jane gave birth to a healthy baby boy named Vincent Cain Vaughan Taylor. Vincent was everything Jane could have asked for. He was perfect. He was a very calm baby and rarely cried. Even as a toddler, he was extremely well behaved. Jane had become pregnant again in 1819, but had a miscarriage. Every pregnancy after was a miscarriage. As Vincent grew older, his behavior started to change. He started to rebel. No matter how many times Bartholomew would scold, Vincent continued to start trouble. This sparked many arguments with Jane. She didn't like how hard Bartholomew was on him. He was her perfect little angel. She never stopped visiting Cain's grave through the years. Bartholomew had once followed her there. He had overheard her worry that he would find out that Vincent wasn't his. Bartholomew was infuriated to discover that his brother had gotten his wife pregnant before he died. But Vincent's behavior started to make sense. He was just like his father. Now that Bartholomew knew the truth, he was more frustrated with Vincent. He reminded him of the brother he hated. This time there was nothing he could do about it. It was his brother Cain who had the last laugh in the end. Vincent Cain Vaughan Taylor was born in 1817. He is Jane and Cain Vaughan Taylor's only child. He was a very calm and quiet baby. His mother was very protective over him. That didn't change as he grew. However, with his father it was different. They had an extremely difficult relationship. Vincent was always trying to get a rise out of him. Sometimes Bartholomew reacted too far. Vincent would then tell his mother what he did to him. Then Jane would argue with Bartholomew. Even when he tried to explain himself, she didn't want to hear it. Jane always chose Vincent's side over his. He could do no wrong in his mother's eyes, and he took advantage of that. In 1831, Jane had become bedridden by an illness. She spent days motionless in bed. Vincent hated the sight of his mother in such state. He was with her when she took her last breath. She passed away in 1833. Her death further estranged Vincent and Bartholomew's relationship. They always argued. The only thing that kept them from killing each other was distance. Bartholomew started to drink to cope with Jane's death. A few years passed. In 1840, Bartholomew was remarried. The young woman's name was Amelia. Around this time, Vincent spent most of his time drinking and hooking up. He was with a different girl every night. One night at a ball, Vincent and Amelia shared a dance. Bartholomew kept a close eye on them. When he lost track of them, he knew something was up. He had caught them together doing what he feared. He confronted Amelia, who belittled the situation. Infuriated, he fought Vincent. Bartholomew went through so much stress that he had a heart attack. Amelia found him and was able to get him help. While he was on bed rest, she continued to fool around with Vincent. But that didn't last when Vincent met someone else. Her name was Penelope, and she wanted nothing to do with him. No matter how much Vincent would pry, she wouldn't give him a chance. They would argue a lot because of it. Eventually, Penelope started to fall for him. They were married in 1845. During that time, Amelia left and was remarried to someone else. Bartholomew remained alone in his room, only receiving visits from his doctor. Vincent went ahead to forge a will so that he gets everything. When Bartholomew dies, he and his wife spent the next few years partying and being in love. In 1850 they were expecting. They had twins, Harold and Bernard. The twins were mostly raised by the nanny and butler, while Penelope and Vincent enjoyed each other. Every now and then they would check in on them. In 1855, Bartholomew passed of a heart condition. He was buried beside Jane like he wanted. And, in his will, he left everything to Vincent, just like he planned.